Thank you very much. I am greatly honored and humbled to receive this award in the memory of Ron Ridenhour, a citizen, a whistleblower, and an investigative reporter of the highest order. I first began the research that would lead to this book, Subversives, in 1981 when I was a journalism student at UC Berkeley. My editor at the Daily Californian asked me to take a look at some FBI records that the campus newspaper had obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. I already knew that UC Berkeley had been an epicenter of student protest during the 1960s. And I knew also that Senator Frank Church's hearings in the 70s had exposed massive FBI surveillance and harassment of people engaged in lawful dissent in other places. So I jumped at the chance to see what the FBI had been up to at Berkeley. I researched the files, I wrote several articles, but I realized that there was much more to the story. So in 1981, I submitted a greatly expanded Freedom of Information Act request seeking any and all records in any way concerning the University of California and more than 100 other organizations and individuals connected with the campus. I figured I would get the files in about a year, write up the stories, and go on to the next project. I had no idea that I was embarking on what would become a 28-year legal battle in which I would bring 5 lawsuits under the Freedom of Information Act, that the FBI would spend more than $1 million trying to suppress the records I was seeking, and that ultimately 7 federal judges would order the FBI to release more than 300,000 pages, that my case would set legal precedent in favor of open government, and that the courts would also order the FBI to pay more than $1 million additionally to my pro bono lawyers for prevailing in court. Thank you. These FBI records provide the most extensive account of the FBI's activities on any college campus during the Cold War period. Among other things, they show that J. Edgar Hoover's FBI initially focused in the 1940s on investigating Soviet espionage attempts to gain secrets from the nuclear laboratories overseen by the University of California. But they show that the FBI veered from that important national security mission to instead turn counterintelligence techniques developed to use against adversaries during wartime on professors and students engaged in legitimate dissent. The FBI unlawfully investigated Mario Savio, the leader of the 1964 free speech movement, a nonviolent protest against a campus rule, and listed him as a key activist, someone to be disrupted and neutralized under the counterintelligence program, or COINTELPRO. The FBI put dozens of students and professors on its so-called security index, a secret nationwide list of people to be detained without warrant in the event of a national emergency. I recently discovered also an FBI record showing that Ron Ridenhour had also been placed on the security index. FBI officials waged a concerted campaign throughout the 1960s to get UC President Clark Kerr fired because they disagreed with his policies and his politics. They leaked false reports about him to the media, to members of the Board of Regents, and even to President Johnson. But eventually, FBI officials realized that they would never get rid of Kerr as long as Pat Brown, Jerry Brown's father, was governor, because Brown was a staunch supporter of Clark Kerr. Kerr was, in fact, one of the towering figures in higher education and the developer of the master plan for higher education that has been used throughout this country and around the world. So when Ronald Reagan ran for governor in 1966, Hoover and other FBI officials viewed this as a breath of fresh air. In fact, the FBI had a secret relationship with Reagan going back to Hollywood in the 40s. The FBI records show that Reagan was a much more active informer in Hollywood than we previously knew, and that he reported other actors and actresses to the FBI, sometimes on the scantiest of evidence. In return for his help in Hollywood, J. Edgar Hoover gave Reagan personal and political assistance in the following decades, In 1960, for example, the FBI helped Reagan investigate the romantic life of his daughter, Maureen Reagan. Then in 1965, just as Reagan was about to begin his run for governor, the FBI warned him that his son, Michael Reagan, was consorting with the son of an infamous mobster, Joe Bonanno. One of the most interesting FBI documents released to me records Reagan's response when he received this secret warning. Reagan said that he was most appreciative and that he realized that such an association and actions on the part of his son might well jeopardize any political aspirations he might have. He stated that he realized it would be improper to express his appreciation in writing. So he asked the FBI agent to convey his great thanks to Hoover personally. Once Reagan was elected governor, the FBI worked with him to suppress student dissent at the University of California, providing him with intelligence reports not only about students and professors, but about members of the Board of Regents, and of course about Clark Kerr, who was fired at the first Regents meeting attended by Reagan in early 1967. My research in the FBI records bears out several observations that Ron Ridenhour made in an essay he wrote for the Los Angeles Times on the 25th anniversary of the My Lai massacre. One of them was that some people, most it seems, will under some circumstances do anything someone in authority tells them to do. Another is that government institutions, like most people, have a reflexive reaction to the exposure of internal corruption and wrongdoing. No matter how transparent the effort, their first response is to lie, conceal, and cover up. I was hopeful when President Obama first took office because one of his first acts in office was to issue a strong statement in support of the Freedom of Information Act. Apparently, that memo never reached the FBI. In my experience, at least, the Department of Justice and the FBI have continued to violate the law as badly, if not more so, than any prior administration. To be sure, today's FBI is more accountable and faces much more oversight than it did in the days of J. Edgar Hoover. But once again, the nation has granted great secrecy and great power to the FBI and other national security agencies to protect it. And as these FBI records show, this combination of secrecy and power can pose a grave threat to democracy, especially during times of national crisis. If I may paraphrase Ron Ridenhour in conclusion, we will serve ourselves and future generations best if we insist on having the transparency necessary for true government accountability. I'd like to thank my publisher, Farrar, Straus & Giroux, my agent, Alice Martell, and my partner, Heidi Benson, for their great support along the way. And my great thanks to the Fertel Foundation and the Nation Institute for this wonderful and humbling award. Thank you very much.